His walk to the palace took him through the red light district, through back alleys that remained dim even in the middle of the day. His joints were stiff and sore, but he ignored the pain and kept his feet moving. Turning right at a corner led him to a single straight road. And there, he stopped. The foul smell that he'd been sensing for a while now had suddenly grown much stronger. However, he reminded himself, such smells were not unusual in Toshima, a city with blood baked into every brick and tile. He resumed his march. Up ahead, a number of narrow side streets branched off from the road on either side. He glanced down, each in passing. Most led to dead ends, but before long, he came upon one that brought him to a halt. Someone was there, sitting against the far wall. His arms lay limp at his sides, and his head drooped forward. Long dead, beggars were conning, and likely the source of the stench. Akira couldn't determine the extent of his injuries from here. The walls and ground were black with dried blood. He wasn't wearing any tags. He was either the tragic victim of a random murder, or an example of what befell those who lost an Igura. Akira had seen enough. He started to take his leave, but something nagged at him, and he turned back toward the corpse. He approached until he was close enough to make out his face. Words failed him. Blue-dyed hair, a black motorcycle jacket. Takeru. No wonder he wasn't wearing tags. His were now in Akira's pocket. His hunched pose made it hard for Akira to tell, but his head and face seemed to have taken considerable damage. The dense odor of rotting blood assaulted his senses. He stumbled backward until he hit the opposite wall. His eyes were locked on Takeru's dead body. He couldn't look away. Did Keisuke do this? I returned the favor. Isn't that what he said? What else could he have meant? But this? The answer was clear, but part of Akira still refused to believe it. The massacre at a club, this grisly murder, it was all too inhuman. The Keisuke whose memory he still clung to could never have done these things. But reality was cruel. It looked him in the face with the eyes of a corpse and trampled that memory flat. And then, Akira realized the source of his disquiet. He was dead. Dead, the very thing he'd hoped to find in this place. the CFC. Dead had been cleaned, bodies laid out in a silent repose, washed and dressed for burial. They had seemed more like things than like people. Perhaps that was why Akira had come to see death as nothing more than a mechanical process. The heart stopped, the lungs stopped, the brain ground to a halt. But that wasn't all, was it? The process, the transmutation of person to thing, had a layer beyond the mechanical, an emotional layer, one that could not be measured by looking at a nicely processed corpse. Before coming to Toshima, he had thought that a trivial matter. He had accepted Emma's proposal not because he feared death, but because languishing in jail had not appealed to him, and because he had resented the idea of letting them decide his fate. Even after he joined Igura, death had not been a concern. He had no intention of losing, of course, but nor had he felt the need to win, to survive, no matter the cost. But now he found himself thinking, I can't afford to die. He couldn't leave Keisuke in that state. Akira himself was uncertain why he felt this way, but there was no denying that he felt Keisuke's absence keenly. It appeared that Keisuke's roots in his heart run deeper than he'd imagined. Were it not for this defense, he might never have realized it, just as one does not think about the air they breathe until it's taken from them. Everything was changing, into what? He could not guess. He had only begun to notice the change after it had left him behind. Life and death, the meaning of his existence, what he now was he beginning to question. Shame filled him. It was as if he'd been living under a rock his whole life. He thought of Takeru, of the desperate dreams in his eyes, of the regret he must have felt to die before achieving it. That dream, the strength of purpose it gave him, was what had set him apart from the other fighters in the city. To think of his final moments made Akira's heart ache. He put his hand in his jacket pocket and quietly closed his fist around the tag and cross, then turned his back on Takeru's remains and left the alley behind. His feet took him to the hotel, not the palace. Too many things had happened today. Leaving his thoughts a jumble, he wanted to regain his composure before he spoke to Arbitro. But when he arrived at the hotel, he couldn't bring himself to step inside. The memories of Keisuke were just too raw. Instead, he found a hiding spot between the hotel and the nearest alley, and there he spent the night. The next day, he woke to find a small crowd had formed across the avenue. He heard no cheers or booing. The crowd was petrified. Fear hung thick in the air. He had encountered a similar scene once before. Where? Before he could locate the scene in his memory, a shrill voice gave him the answer. A blood-curdling scream, punctuated, sound of metal slicing through flesh. Several terrified onlookers stepped back, and through the gaps, Akira glimpsed the executioners, Kiriwar and Gunji. Gunji licked the blood from his clothes, then scolded and spat on the ground.
Matsu! これだから薬中はよ。お前やりすぎだろ。血がくせえ。
人のこと言えんのかよ。お前なんか生まれた時から濁ってんだろ。血がさ。
うるせえな。血も枯れ果てたジジイは黙ってろ。
A man lay curled up on the ground beside them, hands covering his face. Blood poured through the gaps between his fingers. Gunji's work, no doubt. Had he broken some rule then, or was he an innocent victim of their whims?
あおいあれ
All of a sudden, Gunji pointed his claws at Akira.
あああ、あれだあれ。
They approached with an ambling gait, their smiles, the stuff of nightmares. The tags hanging from their weapons and clothing produced a dissonant wail. Akira couldn't recall having broken the rules, but they had seen him together with Akira before the chase. Had they been keeping an eye out for him ever since? Akira stood silent and still as they drew near. His heart was pounding. He wanted to run, but these were dogs. He reminded himself there was nothing they loved more than a chase. Though they were intimidating up close, to be sure, at the moment he could sense the malice in them. They weren't here for his blood. In his own way, this was even more frightening.
お前さ
As soon as he stepped within reach, Kiryu grabbed Akira's chin and jerked his face up. He gave Akira a penetrating look, his eyes steaming with childlike curiosity.
王子様からお呼びかかってんだろ。早く言ってやれよ。お待ちかねだぜ。
お待ちかねすぎて俺たちが借り出されたんだよ。連れてくから早く行け。行っちまえ。
王子アルビトロだよ。届いたんだろ招待状。お前んとこにさ。
Presumably, he meant the car the dog had delivered. Not much time had passed since then. What could be so urgent? Something was going on here.
とにかく俺たちは連れてこいって言われただけだ。生きた状態でともな。
Kiryu laughed huskily, eyes narrowed in amusement.
話せよ。
He swiped Kiryu's hand away from his face. Shock rippled through the crowd. They watched from a distance, holding their breath, their eyes full of curiosity, pity, and awe.
面白いな、お前。
Kiryu's smile deepened. His hand was still hovering beside Akira's head.
何がだ。
ちゃんと見ろよ。その顔に2つ開いてる節穴広げてよ。やってねえからさ、こいつ。
だから何がだよ。
Gunji stopped up and grabbed Akira's chin, just like Kiryu had.
あああ
Akira slapped his hand away too, but all he did was step back, surprise written on his face.
まあ俺たちもあんなクソは使わねえけどな。んなもんなくっても十分いけるし。
大抵歯向かってくんのはラリってるからな。ラインなしで歯向かってくるお前はなんも考えてねえのかな。
Kiryu, who had been bunching his metal pipe on his shoulder, suddenly grabbed Akira's bangs and pushed their faces together. He had only one eye open, but madness shone within. Not the murky glow that dwelt in the eyes of brain addicts like Keisuke. This was something brighter, sharper.
仮面野郎の命令じゃなきゃ頭から食ってやってんだけどな。もったいね
え。His thin lips stretching in a wide grin, he thrust Akira away. The teeth Akira glimpsed in his mouth were as sharp as any wolves.
遊んでねえでとっとと連れてこうぜ。ビトロの命令ってのがぬかっぺらが立ってしょうがねえ。
With moaning impatience, Gunji aimed a heavy kick at the stomach of the man whose face had been slit open.
さーて王子様お待ちかねのお姫様を連行するか。
触るな。うるせえ。
Gunji slammed her kick into the fallen man's belly, then grabbed Akira's arm and walked off. His grip was as strong as iron. They bore him off to the palace like a prisoner, and the eyes of the crowd followed him until he was out of sight. As they ascended the stairs to the palace, the guards did pass all stiffened, visibly. It was almost comical, compared to the way they behaved when the executioners were not present. They watched him with the same naked curiosity as the crowd from before. At the entrance, Kiryu gestured with a jerk of his chin.
開けろよ。はい。
The terrified guard quickly obeyed. Gunji pushed Akira inside, even after the door shut behind them. He made no move to release his arm.
もういいだろう。話せよ。
Gunji reared back a little and stared down his nose through the gaps in his bangs. His wide mouth wore an amused sneer.
お前さ、筋肉質だけどちょっと痩せてね。もっと肉つけねえと。
Suddenly, Gunji yanked his arm up and bit him on the back of the hand. By the time he jerked away, Gunji had already let him go.
うまくねえよ。
Gunji let out a breathy laugh, then folded his arms behind his head and sauntered back toward the entrance.
ここで待ってろ。
Kiryu headed for the entrance as well, thumping his metal pipe against his shoulder. The door swung open and the two executioners vanished onto the streets. The sound of the door closing echoed softly through the cavernous space. Akira let out a deep sigh. Now that he'd spent some time in their company, he knew that it wasn't just their size and strength that made those two so menacing. It was the peculiar consistency of their manner. The way their aggressive yet playful attitude never shifted in tone or intensity. Akira suspected that very little could truly face those two. Even murder was merely a game to them, an action as easy and inconsequential as kicking a pebble down the road. Clearly, they were missing something fundamentally human, and that was precisely what made them so effective. Akira cast his eyes up at the skylights, the tacky decor pressing from all sides. It was stifling. At last, he heard the sound of footsteps on the granite floor. A lone guard emerged from the far end of the hall. He stopped in front of Akira and gave him a cautious nod.
お待たせいたしました。アルビトロ様がお待ちかねです。ご案内いたしましょう。
Beckoning for Akira to follow, the guard led him up the grand staircase that stood at the center of the foyer. The second floor was constructed almost exactly the same as the first, with a corridor extending on either side. In addition to the standard furnishings, the central space included several wall-hung paintings, and of course, numerous plaster sculptures of young boys. The guard proceeded straight down the hall ahead of them, which ended in a pair of black double doors, like their twin on the floor below. The doors were sealed tightly with chains. They likely led to the second tier of Colosseum seating. Stopping at a set of white doors on the left side of the corridor, the guard gave them a quiet knock.
お連れしました。
入れ。
The guard ushered Akira inside. The room was large. At the center was a table, covered by a white tablecloth. Arbiter sat there, smiling. All of the furniture had an antique finish, and a truly expensive-looking carpet adorned the floor. The usual plaster figures were present too, of course. The table was set with dining utensils, a vintage wine bottle, and a pair of wine glasses. Two gun-toting underlings stood silently behind their master.
ようこそ。突然の呼び出しにもかかわらず、応じてくれて本当に嬉しいよ。さあ、かけたまえ。
Swallowing his retort about the manner in which he'd arrived, Akira sat in the indicated chair. Now that he was here, he meant to pry out every piece of information he could about the friend Arbiter had mentioned in his card.
さて、早速で申し訳ないのだが、少し協力してもらいたいことがある。いいかね?
While waiting for Akira's answer, he turned to one of his servants. The man stepped forward. His gloved hand held a syringe. Seeing suspicion on Akira's face, Arbiter calmly shook his head.
君の血液を採取させていただきたい。ほんの少しでいい。
何に使うつもりだ。
私はね、血液コレクターなんだよ。変わってるだろ？個人的な趣味だ。
Arbiter smiled, as if he found something funny. It was an obvious lie. Arbiter's tone suggested that he knew Akira wouldn't swallow it.
あんたの悪趣味具合を見てると、つい納得しそうになるけどな。信じられない。
悪用など、到底無理な程度の量しかいただかない。
血液採取に見せかけておいて、ラインでも打つんじゃないのか。
何のために？
奴隷を作るため、とかな。
He fixed Arbiter with a defiant stare. In response, the masked man chuckled.
なかなか自意識過剰じゃないか。面白い。安心したまえ。確かに君の顔は好みだが、奴隷にしたいタイプではない。
His brazen words gave Akira the chills.
断ってくれても構わないよ。ただし、私も気まぐれでね。ひょっとしたら、お友達の話をしたくなくなるかもしれないが。
A challenging light entered his eyes as he contemplated Akira from behind his mask. As Akira fell silent, Arbitra's servant took his right arm and rolled his jacket sleeve up above his elbow.
ご協力感謝する。
Arbitra smiled, widening in satisfaction. After swabbing the inside of Akira's elbow without alcohol, the man uncapped the slender needle. He felt its chilly touch and a moment of sharp pain. As Arbitro had promised, the man soon withdrew the syringe. He placed a small piece of gauze over the affected area and tapped it down, then exited the room with a bow.
不愉快な思いをさせてすまなかった。まずは乾杯と行こうか。
Another servant poured wine into Akira's glass.
君、名前は？もちろん国民番号じゃない方の。あんなもの全くナンセンスだからな。
When Akira said nothing, Arbitra shrugged his shoulders in mock dismay.
名前くらいはいいだろう。ずっと君と呼び続けるのは少々つらい。君は私のお客様だ。さあ、教えておくれ。
Akira looked away. He was only making a fool of himself by being stubborn.
アキラ。
アキラか。ありがとう。いい名前だ。
Arbitra raised his wine glass. He seemed unperturbed when Akira declined to do the same.
今日のこの日、アキラとの出会いを祝して、乾杯。
After speaking those frankly sure-inducing words, Arbitra put his glass to his lips.
飲まないのかね？
何が入ってるかわからないからな。
Arbitra gave him an easy smile, as if he could see right through him.
まるで木ぐらいの高い猫のようだな。素敵だ。だが、今日のために特別な料理も用意させた。なんなら、君の分を部下に毒味させても構わんよ。晩餐には少し早い時間だが、まあいいだろう。
The ornately decorated clock on the wall showed that it was late afternoon. Arbitra once again exchanged looks with one of his servants. The man left the room, and a different man soon entered, carrying a silver tray full of food. One dish after another began to appear on the table. Delicacies such as no regular citizen had seen since before the war. The exquisite presentation made Akira think of French cuisine, though he had only the vaguest of memories to draw on.
ほとんど口にしたことなどないだろう。存分に味わってくれたまえ。
Arbitra waved at the feast before him, his expression supremely confident. Akira felt a surge of visceral disgust. This man brandished ill-raised authority as though it were his own, used bloodsport to market reign on a vast scale, and now basked, complacent, in his wealth, which he had built on a foundation of misery and debt. He was every bit the loathsome aristocrat that his dress and manner suggested.
イルレ様々だな。
His sardonic tone failed to put a dent in Arbitra's smile.
さあ、温かいうちに召し上がれ。
Steam rose from the table, along with the appetizing scent. His stomach growled. He hadn't eaten a proper meal in days. However, Akira refused to take the bait. Instead, he repeated his earlier words.
何が入ってるかわからない。
Arbiter sighed, shaking his head.
やれやれ。強情だな。それでは手土産に持って帰るといい。
そんなことより、早く本題に入りたい。
本題？ああ。お友達の話か。もう少し待っていただけるだろうか。そろそろだと思うのだが。
On cue, a reserved knock sounded at the door, and the man who had drawn Akira's blood entered.
失礼します。
He went straight to Arbitro and whispered something in his ear. The mouth below Arbitro's mask curved into a triumphant smile.
ご苦労。
The man bowed and left the room. Arbitro was still smiling. He gave Akira the look of someone whose suspicions had been confirmed.
ちょうど良いタイミングだったな。お望み通り本題に入れるようだ。
He took a sip of wine, put his elbows on the table, and rested his chin on his clasped hands.
まず、先ほどの血液採取についてだが、君の思っていた通り私は嘘をついた。異例を詫びよう。まあ、あんなに見えすいていたら、騙したうちには入らないと思うがね。実は少々調べさせてもらったんだよ。君の血液について。
何のために？
重ねて言うが、悪用のためではない。気になることがあったものでね。
Arbitro paused for another mouthful of wine. He clearly intended to draw this out.
クラブでの騒ぎの件は知っているかな？
あ
あ。あの騒ぎが起きた日、報告を受けて私も現場へ赴いていてね。奥の部屋を調べていた時、フロアで喧嘩が始まってしまったんだよ。一人はタケルという男だったかな。
Arbiter put on a meaningful smile, his eyes watching for Akira's reaction. He must have seen Akira at the club.
優勢だったはずの彼が突然苦しみ出してね。少々不自然に見えたものだから、遺体を回収がてら調べてみたんだよ。彼が先日亡くなったのは知っているかね？
His tone remained light, as if chatting about the weather.
彼の血液から彼のものではない DNA が検出された。体内で異物と判断されて激しい拒否反応を起こしたようだ。
He fixed Akira with a steady stare. Akira realized that his heart was pounding.
彼の体内から検出された DNA。誰のものだったと思う？アキラ。君のものと酷似しているんだよ。